Welcome to Slimehouse, a podcast rated PG for crude humor, outrageous hijinks, and mild language. I'm Dorothy.
I'm Jasper.
I'm Jared.
I'm Max.
I'm Nelson.
And
so what a year it's been. It's been one crazy year, that's for sure.
It really has.
Definitely,
consumed a lot of slime, more than ever before with all this time I've had at home.
But it's been a fun first season.
It has.
I'm very excited for this finale. It's a nice, cap on a good debut year.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's cool to see what we've already learned about the genre just from covering a select few titles, and just want to give a big shout out because this is a project born out of the pandemic. I don't know if we would have really acted on it if we weren't in pandemic mode. So props everyone for making lemons.
That's how I see it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really weird to watch. It's weird to have seen it gone from when Max and I were in high school to how it is now.
It is.
And it seemed to happen so fast. It's crazy to already be at the finale of the first.
And it's just been a great project, and just all the little moving pieces we have, all these interviews we've gotten with people, especially such a pleasant surprise. I never thought in my wildest dreams I get to interview someone like Christopher McDonald. So that's been amazing. And just this might be I feel like Jasper and Nelson might relate to this, but this reminds me of my days doing the Chapman radio in college, and it's just it's that side of me I haven't really worked with in the last 5 years, so it's kind of nice to reactivate it.
Yeah, I love that. It feels kind of journalistic in a sense, which is really cool. A lot of kind of research going into it and things like that, which is something that's always rewarding. I'm actually curious, Max and Dorothy, is there anything new about the genre that you guys have discovered over the last 4 or 5 months?
Oh yeah, for sure. Because kind of the idea of Slimehouse simply kind of came from just a feeling of when you see a movie, it's Slimehouse. So I hadn't really thought about many of these tropes and character types and all this. Even if I noticed them, I never really thought about how collective they were and how much they tied this together as a genre. So yeah, I've definitely learned a great deal about Slimehouse.
Of course, what makes Slimehouse memorable is that feeling that Max is talking about, that we named the genre before we knew all the specific tropes and things that qualify something as Slimehouse. But what really solidifies that as something worthy of the discussion and the research that you all do is that it has these defining features that we didn't even know until we looked deep enough, and they're really consistent. So it's actually a really solid theory, and I think it belongs in the film canon.
Amen to that. And yeah, Max, I think it's so cool. I don't know how many of our listeners know this, but we did not know you before we started this podcast. And so I think it's awesome that you kind of said yes, and then we all just went for it. It was kind of just good fortune that we were all...
Yeah, it was awesome of you all. Thank you for reaching out to include me on the podcast and with the idea for it, because when I made a list like that, I never thought it would go on to be any sort of project beyond that.
It blew my mind because aside from just the fun of making the list and seeing it get a little traction online, we were kind of sad that it wouldn't have too much of a recognizable footprint in film, but now it looks like it will.
Yeah, it's been cool to see actually, on Letterboxd, especially where you guys kind of first published the list, just user reviews kind of use the term in jest, but also, as a genuine way to describe movies. Users that, some we know, some people we don't know. Kudos to you Lexingtonians for your Slimehouse foresight there.
Yeah, thank you.
Max has put a lot of work into that list and thought, and it makes me happy that it came this far.
Yeah.
And so with that, do we want to jump into this kind of year-end celebration?
Yeah, for sure. I can go over a synopsis of what you all did to get us here.
Yeah.
So we're playing a little game today. What we decided to do was prove that Slimehouse is still alive in the year 2020. The Slimehouse team collectively identified 25 different movies from 2020 that looked from the outside that they could be within the Slimehouse genre. They watched as many as they could, and without discussing their scores amongst each other, the Slime scores were submitted to me, the MC, privately, and I calculated the top 10 highest Slime scores to count down live on today's show.
Very exciting.
So we're going to find out what the top 10 slimiest movies of 2020 are.
Yeah, none of us know one another's votes, so none of us have any idea what's going to show up at this, and especially what's going to top the list.
And just to kind of clarify, even further, each movie's ranking is determined by kind of the average slime score from the four of us, Nelson, Jasper, Max, and Jared, which Dorothy will, speak towards before she identifies every movie on the list. But yeah, this is a really fun exercise, you guys. I just want to say really quick before we start, who knew that there were this many, true contenders in the year 2020?
We talked a little bit about Neo Slime movies with the Goosebumps films that came out a while back, but I didn't know even then that there were so many movies out there like this that have like sort of a common vibe. So it was really cool to see all that in action and watch so many, have a little movie marathon these last couple of weeks.
Yeah. I feel like when we first suggested this idea, it was like, oh, we'll just have a few movies and there'll probably be about 10. So we'll just watch all 10 and rank them, And then suddenly it's like the Hydra where once you cut off one, like you found two more. And I feel like then all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow. If you just look for it, seek and ye shall find. There are a lot of slime movies in this year.
And there's definitely some that I didn't even watch. Just out of the sheer probably like idea of being slimed out on a personal level. But I think we covered most of the bases.
Yeah, I feel like the pandemic has had a strange impact on Slimehouse because all these studios just can't make anything new and they just want to put stuff out so they can just have content and gain revenue. So they've just been dumping these like children's movies that were filmed forever ago and just kind of stuck in a limbo, which I feel like is at least a few of these movies we talked about. That fits the description. Magic Camp and The War with Grandpa. Both are. But we can get into that.
Yeah. We'll talk about some specific titles. But yeah, I think we're going to see that pandemic actually was a boom to the Slimehouse genre with kids needing to stream some stuff. In our first rounds, we kind of looked far and wide, and each of us, there were some movies that if one of us saw it and said, it's not really Slimehouse, we just eliminated it. And then for the ones that were maybe contenders, and we were pretty broad just because with the hopes of really getting a diverse set of scores, we would then try to all see it. And so by the end, we saw all the main ones. So all of us watched about 25 movies to get to.
It's funny if you look at like my letterbox like right now, if you didn't know I was doing this for some project, you'd think I was insane because I'd seen like 2 2020 releases and now I've seen like 30 something and it's all just weird children's movies.
Yeah, I was definitely getting a little self-conscious towards the end there. I started to pepper in like I did a Kelly Reichardt marathon last weekend to remind people on Letterboxd that I'm not just a children's movie.
Yeah, I feel like that's a good anecdote to
credibility.
Slime, I feel like there's no one further from Slimehouse.
Yeah, definitely
their style.
I'm still an IMDb user, and it averages your movies by year, so you can see like what years you like the best. And my 2020 score took a real hit because of Slime.
No other reason.
Well, all right, Dorothy, you want to kind of lead us into the beginning of this list?
Before I read the top 10 contenders, I just want to thank you all for having me as your MC. It's been really cool. So thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for compiling all the scores, and hopefully we don't have a La La Land Moonlight moment, but I think we're in good hands.
All right. In the top 10 spot at 6.25, we have The Witches.
Ooh,
The Witches.
Spooky slime.
Buzzer beater.
Whoa! Why are we mouses?
Mice.
Whatever.
See, like, I'm a stats guy, so I wonder what is the like deviation, like what's like the range of scores? Like, do we have that information here?
I mean, we could talk about it.
so.
We could talk about it
have...
amongst each other.
Yeah, because I gave it a 6, so I was like right on the money.
I also gave it a 6. Just to jump off, I really liked this movie. Actually, so this is obviously a remake of the '90s Nicholas Roeg movie with Angelica Houston, which I actually had bad memories of as a kid. So I actually, coming back to this one, I really liked it, and I was actually very skeptical of its sliminess. But Zemeckis kind of surprised me here with this one. Beyond kind of the CGI that he's become such a wizard at, that felt very kind of in the Slimehouse vein. The story was also, and that's credit to Roald Dahl, who wrote the original book. the story felt very in the realm of a lot of the, kind of narrative structures that we've looked at before.
And I actually had never seen the Roeg version, so I watched both of them, like, well, not back to back. I watched this Saturday, I watched the 1990 version, and then Sunday I watched the 2020 version. And really interesting sort of comparison, because I think they both have slime elements to them. I think the older version, it works better as like a horror movie, and then I think the the modern version has a very animate. Like, I think the performances are maybe a little slimier. I think maybe the look of the movie is like more neo slime. So, but I definitely felt like it got slimier as it went along, and I think it's just because of the nature of the story, and I don't want to spoil anything, but it definitely gets a little more fantastical as it goes along. But also, Anne Hathaway's performance in this, it reminded me a little bit of Glenn Close in 101 Dalmatians, or 102, if you will. That kind of like, very prestige actress who kind of embraces this more kind of campy, villainous performance in a family movie.
I hold the 1990 version of The Witches to very high regard. It was a VHS I owned and watched a lot. And so this movie was really hard for me. It was actually the last movie I watched, and I really loathed it. I thought that I'll give the bit of positivity that Zemeckis knows how to shoot CGI characters very well, and there's a lot of great cinematography from the perspective of characters that are CGI. So he knows what he's doing there, but it felt so hollow and rushed compared to the older version. Funnily enough, they're both 90 minutes long, but somehow the pacing of the original, especially with like the lore of the witches and how we learned who witches are and their deal, just felt a lot more well laid out, and everything just felt like a copy of the old one, but with a little bit of a slimy twist, and actually not a ton of slime, not as much as I necessarily thought. But I actually gave it a 7 because I did feel like it had enough of a slimy structure and a few very slimy moments and characters, but not like blowing the lid on slime.
Yeah, I ended up giving this a 7 as well. I just think that the way Zemeckis sort of refocused a lot of the storyline on the mice and just all these action scenes with the mice, I thought introduced a very slimy element. It put way more of like because the original's legitimately very scary, so it's like an exciting movie, but this was more focused around like hijinks. It never felt like they were in like terrible danger, even when the story called for it, just because of the tone. And I just think the addition of all this like slapstick with the mice and a lot of the humor in this, as well as the look with a lot of the CGI, made me think it was a lot slimier than I thought it was going to be. I think what kept it from being higher was it had like a historical framing narrative to it that I feel like felt very not slimy to me. But otherwise, I think it would have even been higher than the 7 in slime, just based off of the sort of humor that was in this.
It could have gone even more slimy at times. I mean, there's a moment, Stanley Tucci gets a very Slimehouse moment where somehow he gets kicked in the crotch or something like that and kind of goes crazy with that. And I felt like it needed even more slapstick moments like that to get a higher slime score.
Yeah, actually, I agree. I think the slapstick was a little low in this movie for sure. But the thing that I kept going back to when watching this movie, which I actually have it at a lower slime score than you guys, but the thing that really made it slimy to me was knowing in the original that a lot of the effects were very practical, and Jim Henson did a lot of the puppetry in the 90s version, and seeing this one, all the effects being CGI, it really upped the ante in terms of just like the cartoonishness of the whole affair. The comedy, the slapstick comedy that was there was so exaggerated and so lively that it really did speak to that kind of live action cartoon ethos that we always talk about a lot. And then the other thing too, just it's such a bright movie. It's so colorful and so kind of vibrant, and to me that real saturation of color is very Slimehouse to me. So yeah, that's kind of where I landed with this one. But it's not necessarily there's not necessarily a lot of humor, and that's what really knocked it down for me.
Yes, I agree with that. Actually, it's funny. I was ready to give it a lower slime score, but the ending 5 minutes or so, especially with some traveling moments,
Yeah.
felt very Slimehouse to me.
Yeah, I actually did change mine. I like already put mine down before like that ending, and that was like, okay, this is probably a little more slimy with this mouse-based humor. like,
Mouse-based humor. That is a new.
And I gotta say,
that's
like something about Chris Rock voicing a rodent is very Slimehouse, because he also voiced a hamster in the 1998 Doctor Dolittle, and that may or may not be relevant to a later pick on the list. We'll see.
Sneak.
Yeah. I didn't think Octavia Spencer was super slimy. She gets to have a dancing grandma moment.
Yeah.
That's probably her most slimy. But it wasn't like she wasn't going for Jim Carrey by any means.
Yeah,
for sure. I think the movie before, like the movie without the witches, the moments with the witches in the hotel, I feel like are pretty slimy. I think the whole
Definitely.
narrative surrounding that is what kind of pulls it down from being a slimier movie than it is. But still, I gave it a 7, so I still thought it was more slimy than not.
Yeah, and there was also an element of, with the mice, this kind of DIY kind of nature, which we always talk about, with no spoilers, but there's a pretty pivotal scene where Octavia Spencer uses her knitting skills to create a form of transportation. The mice use toys and other, household items as ways to get around. You see that in a lot more like a lot more sentimentalish movies kind of in the 90s, but I still think that that's such a fundamental thing of Slimehouse is kids using the things around them to create really bigger than life adventures. And to me that really rung true to the kind of Slimehouse thematic tenets.
All right, ready for the next one?
Hell
Yeah, let's hear it.
All right, coming in at number 9 with a score of 6.75 is 4 Kids and It.
Oh, Four Kids and
wow.
It.
I'm a little surprised.
So
Interesting.
sleeper, I feel like. I wasn't sure if that was going to make it in here.
Was that it?
What do you mean? It's extremely tiring.
And stinky.
And this is a movie I saw when I googled 2020 slime. It's like the first movie that came up I had time to pleasure with. So then I shared the photo of like the box art of the movie. It has like the cast, and which includes Matthew Good, Paula Patton, Marcel Brandt, and then Michael Caine. And I think it says Michael Caine is the voice of the creature of the movie. And then like I sent that to the group text for Slimehouse, and like Max's response was like, "Holy shit!" And then like the rest is history. It's made it in the top 10.
Just Michael Caine as that voice, I feel like, is what made this even a slimy movie at all. I think I ended up giving it a 7, just like the last movie, and it's just because of this character of It. Otherwise, it's just kind of a British kind of comedy, kind of the tone of like how I feel like the Peter Rabbit movies or something might feel.
Sure.
But then they add this character that's just this It, or he had a real name, but I don't recall. But It is his name in the title. And he's just this green, lanky creature voiced by Sir Michael Caine, who can grant wishes, but he farts. To take it over the edge, when he grants these wishes, he like blows up really big and then farts. And that is what made me think this is a little slimy for sure.
In his very first moment, he both burps and he farts, and then the 5-year-old calls him stinky.
Yeah, this is one of those movies where the first like 15 minutes I was like, like kind of in the same vein as, the kind of movies you were talking about, Max, like these kind of like British kids movies. But then I started thinking, once all this kind of, this It creature voiced by Michael Caine appears in it, then I was thinking of the term Gunge House, which you made up, Max, and I thought, oh, maybe this is the 2020 version of Gunge House, which is, that more kind of proper British, a more higher class version of Slimehouse, if you will.
It's a little bit between there because it's not as high class as it could be. It's not like a classic children's literature, but I found a lot of tropes in this. I do agree that it's really slow. It's 110 minutes and it feels like it.
Yeah, for sure.
But within that, there's a lot of the familiar tropes. There's a big one that's just wish fulfillment. The thing grants wishes, so a girl gets a pink helicopter in one scene, and it feels like and then they get to fly, which that felt like a very Slimehouse wish to have. And so moments like that really made me bump it up because of how it felt very familiar to these other movies.
Yeah, also I feel like Russell Brand's performance as the villain of this film, it's not quite as slimy or over the top as some of these villain performances, but he's definitely going like all in as this miserly uncle. And I feel like having like he's not much of a comedy star anymore, I guess, but having a comedy star doing this sort of wacky kids role felt very slimy to me.
It definitely felt like it had certain slimy scenes, such as just the scenes where the kids are being granted their wishes, and one of them becomes a pop star, and then like one is like starts really good at client. Like I feel like those sequences were Slimehouse, but I don't think this movie really committed to that slimy vibe very much. I think it was just very sporadic.
Yeah, I think this is one of those movies that aesthetically I don't think is very slimy at all.
Agreed.
To be honest, I actually think I had this at a lower slime score myself, like a 4 or 5. But so many of kind of the narrative tropes we've looked at and the tone, kind of the humorous tone of what a lot of the kids go through, I think really, made it very Slimehouse to me. These kids are both from families of divorced parents. There's a lot of that wish fulfillment we were talking about. There's current references to Nintendo Switches and other things like that just felt very within that. A kid's movie from the kid's perspective that succeeds in that kind of wish fulfillment fantasy narrative. But again, aesthetically, it besides the character of, it, which is actually fairly impressive CGI for a kind of bottom barrel movie.
He's a Samyad. That's what the name of the character is.
Samyad. Yeah. That's right. A Samyad. It doesn't necessarily feel very, Slimehouse aesthetically to me.
Yeah, I feel like something that really reminded me of was there was kind of a wave of movies. I don't know what started this wave, but like the one I think of is The Water Horse, which was the movie about like a little British kid that found the sea monster and raised it as a pet. And
yes.
And I feel like that's what the tone of this is. Definitely. I don't know what to call that kind of movie, but I guess not even Gunge House, a little bit below that. But this
Young
did
Adult
add
House.
in, this did add in like some farts and some like zany wishes and like a funny Russell Brand performance. So I think it was slimier than it could have been, but still aesthetically, it just looked like any decently shot movie. It didn't have a slimy aesthetic, and the music was not very slimy. The tone was not slimy, even if some of the content.
It almost felt like it wasn't working as like a E.T. style drama or a water horse, and so they had to kind of pepper in Slimehouse as a resting crutch. Like there's a moment where Russell Brand is climbing his way up something, and then a bird just like a bird poops on his face. He just kind of has this like reaction that's very like, ugh, I hate being pooped on. And and so I feel like they kind of rested on Slimehouse because it's kind of a default if something isn't working for kids movies to make it entertaining.
One last note before we hear the next ranking. I do think it's important to note that and not too surprising that these first two films are both adaptations and kind of modernized adaptations for Kids in It, especially being not a direct adaptation from the Nesbitt novel Five Children in It. They, it's this modernized contemporary adaptation of these, classic stories to cater to kind of the modern children audience.
I have to read my favorite line from the 5-year-old because it's a family of divorce, which feels very Slimehouse, and she says, "Daddy's gone to live with another lady. She reeled him in with her tight 20-year-old tushy."
Yikes.
Yeah, I agree. Less aesthetics, but much more of the familiar tropes. ACAB shows up, among other things.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are some
ACAB
very
shows up in
bumbling
The
cops.
Witches, too, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it did.
All right. Dorothy, what do you got for number 8? I'm chomping at the bit.
All right, coming in at number 8 with a score of 7 is Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made.
Ooh.
Really?
I don't collaborate with law enforcement.
How come?
I have a partner.
Oh, that's cool. Who's that?
His name is Total. He's a 1,500-pound polar bear.
Whoa. Are you serious?
This was in my top 3. I think this is a very slimy movie.
All right, tell us more. Yeah.
Okay, like, here's the thing, and I think this is relevant to the last movie we talked about. I think there's one thing we've been building on this season is the difference between a family movie and the difference between like a family movie that's Slimehouse. Like what's Slimehouse and what's like a family movie but not Slimehouse. And I think thematically, I feel like Timmy Failure is so slimy because of how the story is told from the kid's point of view and how it kind of brings you into his kind of wacky his wacky little world, and just the way that his character clashes with authority figures, with like just kind of the culture around him, and then also just like the way he clashes with reality even. I just think that like I think of the themes that I think are unique to Slimehouse but not to just family films in general are the ones where it's like there's sort of like an like a sort of a pop punk or anti-authoritarian kind of like streak to them, and I think this movie really embodied that. So I do think there are things about it that maybe we'll want to hear what you guys think and why it's lower than I expected. But
to toot my own horn, this was number 8 on my prediction list of how things would go. So, and I actually gave it a straight 7 for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned, Jared. I think that you bring up a really good point that I will support about this movie's kind of anti-authoritarian message. There's something about this movie that the kind of visuals. I wouldn't say it's a very funny movie. I think a lot of Slimehouse, obviously, we've talked about, is comedic, especially slapstick or kind of scatological. This movie isn't particularly funny, but it's supposed to be funny. I just don't think it's particularly funny.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I didn't.
Mistakes were made.
Mistakes were made. That said, I think that anti-authoritarian attitude, I think, is really key to this movie, and it being a true kids movie from a kid's perspective, how a kid sees the world and how they interpret the world, and how they learn about the world, and that's why I think this movie, to me, it's a 7 for that reason. If it was funnier, it'd be an 8 or 9, but it definitely embodies that idea of a kid thinking that they know more about the world than everybody else around them.
I think first I just want to say this movie did not work for me as a movie at all. Yeah, I think because it's from Timmy's point of view and the kid cast, I actually found the supporting kid cast very great, and they get a lot of funny moments. And then you've got like Wallace Shawn as the teacher kind of going up against him. So those moments I was like, yeah, this feels like the good old fashioned Slimehouse in some regard.
Yeah, for me, I gave this one like a straight down the middle 5, which I don't know. I feel like that's lower than a lot of people. And for me, it just was like, this felt like very much a family movie, but a lot of the humor didn't really strike me as very slimy at all, as well as it kind of was I don't want to call it a serious movie, but it is more like plot driven than it is gag driven for sure. And just the setting of Portland, which I think was actually to this movie's credit, a really cool setting, and like they made good use of it. But a lot of the Portland based humor didn't really seem slimy to me. It felt more like kind of a watered down like style of Portlandia style humor, in that like they had like the hipsters with beards he thought were Russians, and there were food trucks, and like the World Naked bike ride was brought up at one point. And I feel like a lot of those references didn't read as slimy to me, but it did have this anti-authoritarian streak. It had kind of the random humor with the polar bear. It did have a very, very child-driven narrative. So yeah, I'd say a 5 for me.
It does also end with a dance party with everyone in the cast and a kid doing the floss, which we will see again in this top 10.
We will see multiple times.
Yes,
possibly multiple times in this top 10.
Since Portland was brought up, like, I agree about how it was used, but I do think that gives this movie, like, I almost want to call it like a hipster slime vibe, because it wasn't like so like upfront about its humor, but just like it's very reserved in its style. It's actually directed by Tom McCarthy, who made the Best Picture winner Spotlight. So I think it was made by someone who had like a real sense of craft and wasn't like just going in on like, cheap kind of like stock Slimehouse humor.
Yeah, I actually when I was watching it, I made a note that said this is a elementary school version of Brick, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, directed by Rian Johnson, which for that reason I kind of really enjoyed it. I can't say I loved it, or I don't think it's a good movie, but I was completely intrigued by this movie. And I think, you know, it could have gone somewhere really, really interesting, kind of with just how it depicts how a child kind of sees the world and how they kind of almost take their imagination as literal sometimes. I think that's a really fascinating concept that we see kind of cheapened in a lot of movies. You know, the concept of imagination, I think, is turned into this thing that's so fantastical and so, you know, bigger than life so many times in these kind of movies. Whereas I liked how grounded Timmy's kind of imagination was in the world. I to me, I think as slimy as that idea is, I do think it knocked it down a little bit because it didn't exaggerate that idea of kind of a children's perspective. Whereas I think Slimehouse needs to exaggerate that perspective of a younger lens.
Well, I bet the book could have been adapted even slimier, but I do think it has some of that where it starts with like this car mishap or whatever that ends up all being in the kid's imagination, as does so much of the hijinks are just in his imagination. Another element that I think makes it slimier is this single parent narrative, which we're going to see a lot this year, but it's really driven, it has a lot of that like single adults flirting, which we talk about, and just a single parent struggling to make it work and how that affects the kid, which feels like a really seminal part of Slimehouse in general.
Lucky number 7. What do you got, Dorothy?
All right, coming in at number 7 with a score of 7 is Doolittle.
Interesting.
Got a tie.
Oh, Doolittle.
Nobody told me there'd be a dragon.
I'm too beautiful to die.
This is like the big budget Slime. This is definitely the biggest budget movie we watched, and it felt like the outset the most big Slime movie possible, and it's a remake of a Slimehouse movie for what that's worth. It has a lot of that. I mean, the movie's about a guy who talks to animals. Maybe that's enough.
No, I don't think that's enough. I think this movie takes it to another level.
Yeah, I mean, one thing we define a lot of Slimehouse movies, especially ones from the '90s, as like this kind of like amateur collision of real live action and animation. Something like The Witches, which we've already talked about, that had a very like the CGI in that movie was a lot more skillful. Timmy Failure with the polar bear also. But this movie's use of like CGI felt a lot more like sloppy and amateur, and that gave it more of like, it felt like it had more in common with like the classic Slimehouse movies like Flubber because of that, and how the live action, like the actors and the animated characters kind of collided. And also just, it's nice to have two movies back to back with animated polar bears. And having John Cena.
Yeah, John Cena. It was a great.
John Cena voice for polar bear is just that they knew what they were doing for Slime.
Yeah, a polar bear that calls everyone bro, which I feel like one of the slimier touches.
It's the movie most hobbled in post-production that we've seen. You can tell it's just like been annihilated by editing. There's a moment where a stowaway hops on the ship, a pirate of sorts, and he has like a yar moment, and he's never seen again. Like, just nope.
Oh, that's funny.
Happening.
I took that as a joke. Like, you just see him once and that's the joke. Because I feel like that's a very Slimehouse joke, like the "Who are you? How did you get here?" kind of joke. Of like just
it needed a payoff though. It needed him to come back in some way. It's like Chekhov's gun with no third act.
Yeah. This movie was, I actually was very interested in watching this movie because as slimy as it looked, I had a hunch that it actually wouldn't be very slimy. Yeah, this movie is, you know, it's very juvenile in its humor. There's a moment when Dr. Dolittle is in prison and there's a rabbit or some other kind of rodent talking with him across the jail cell. And he says, "Oh, did Dr. Dolittle do a little doo-doo?" That I just kind of laughed at a lot. And then even the climax of this movie is Robert Downey Jr. like shoves a onion in a dragon's butt and then it farts out a bagpipe. Like, That's literally the climax of this movie. Like no.
Yeah, this movie ends with like an enema. I don't know if you can get much slimier.
You could say it was the Slimax of the movie.
Oh, the slime. A new term, maybe.
Yeah.
And it has a friendly dragon, which reminded me so much of Shrek. A friendly female dragon too, and just that dynamic of the farting dragon.
Yeah, I ended up giving this movie a score of a 6, which isn't like super high, but higher than I was anticipating giving it, because I had a feeling that even though this was like a talking animal, of course, a Dr. Dolittle movie, it seemed like they were kind of going for more of a tone of a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean, except a little more juvenile, and they sold it as this like swashbuckling epic. But I feel like having this all-star cast, all voicing animals, is something that felt very like throwback Slime to me. In the way of like something like Racing Stripes, where you have like a huge celebrity, like you have a huge celebrity like Octavia Spencer, and she's just playing like a dog or a goose or whoever she is, and like Rami Malek like coming right off of an Oscar win, just voicing like sort of an anonymous gorilla that's scared. Like this like weird stunt casting for animals feels very slimy to me.
It reminds me of the Little Dicky music video for the Earth song.
Oh
yeah, when they had so many celebrities. Yeah,
that's very funny. Yeah, this was a weird one. Aside from the slime factor, which is definitely there, this movie just, and I know there was a lot of post-production issues on this movie, but it just felt like it was being played at like 2 times speed. Like when you turn on a podcast at like 2 times speed, like the narrative just kind of like skipped sense, and like they just like, you could tell they just cut lines like left and right. This was a weird movie to watch. I don't hate it. I don't think it's awful. It's more just like a fascinating watch in terms of just big budget movies gone wrong.
It's also shot by Guillermo Navarro, who shot Stuart Little and Spy Kids and a few other Slimehouse movies over the year. So I think it has some of that component to it. I saw a lot of tropes in this. I don't need to list them all, but there are definitely a lot there. A new one I want to bring up is when a villain meets a fate worse than death. In this case, he's left to like live in like a dragon cave with bats or something like that.
That does feel very slimy.
Is that Michael Sheen's character?
Yeah.
Michael Sheen is just great at playing these campy villains. Like, also in the Twilight movies, I love his performance in that, because he's just like, they let him do whatever he wanted, and he's just not giving a crap.
A funny thing I made in my notes about Michael Sheen in this movie is there's multiple jokes cracked about how the villain has no chin. But Michael Sheen clearly has a chin in this movie, so none of those jokes to me made any sense, because like, don't write in a bunch of jokes about a character having no chin and then cast an actor who very clearly has not a very defined chin, but a chin, a very visible chin.
Yeah, it's not
casting chinless actors.
Just for this one joke, we gotta have a chinless actor.
And I thought, oh, maybe it's just one joke, but there was 2 or 3 jokes.
Oh yeah, it was a running like joke through the movie. Yeah, and so just speaking of more, I know Nelson mentioned the cinematographer. This also was scored by Danny Elfman, which I feel like gave it. We've talked about him frequently scoring these slimy movies, and actually it was produced by Joe Roth, who is a Slimehouse super producer who also directed Christmas with the Cranks. So there's a pretty good slime pedigree behind this too. So I feel like it could have been a little slimier, but it honestly was slimier than I was expecting it to be. I thought it would be a much more proper sort of like, I didn't know it would have so much sort of fart and poop humor, which I feel like took it over the edge.
It made me really want to revisit the Eddie Murphy 2 movies. I think we should.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Agree, for sure.
Definitely.
Max, would you throw this in the Gunge House?
I'd say it borders on Gunge House for sure. Definitely aesthetically, like peak Gunge House aesthetic, but a little too like scatological still, and like
nice.
And all like mostly a lot of American actors in it, which I feel like kind of stops it from being full Gunge.
Oh, it does have a breakfast machine.
It does have a breakfast machine, so I feel like that on its own gives it a a +1 for me to the slime score.
Yeah. Oh man.
Coming in at number 6 with a score of 7.25 is Sonic the Hedgehog.
Oh, Sonic.
Interesting.
SFPD!
Meow? Oh, come on.
This was the last movie I watched. I finished it a couple days ago in our run.
This was actually the last. This was the last movie I saw in a movie theater. So this is this movie. Oh wait, no. Actually, the first. I'm not counting the Impractical Jokers movie. So sorry. But so not counting the Impractical Jokers movie. This is my last movie in a theater, and I feel like this feels more theatrical than that.
Definitely.
So, like, one thing about Sonic, not just in this movie, but as like an overall character across different mediums, I think I think the presence of that blue hedgehog and just the personality he's typically given, which is this very like spazzing kind of like kid punk sort of vibe, that also kind of ties into what I was talking about back in Timmy Failure. Like, I think Sonic the Hedgehog is kind of a slime icon almost. And while this is the first of these movies that I saw, and it was before we even started this podcast, but I did find this movie bland, but I did also feel like it did capture some of that aspect of Sonic the Hedgehog as just Sonic, and I think that, and then also just it's a fairly slimy Jim Carrey performance, and this is the third movie of his we've talked about, so yeah.
It has. I didn't realize that, because I'm not a big Sonic fan or whatever. I didn't realize that he's kind of personified as a 10-year-old and kind of has 10-year-old opinions and aesthetics, and says stuff like "no school" and kind of has that attitude. So I think that having not only a CGI character interacting with non-CGI characters, but a CGI character who has the psyche of a 10-year-old boy made this feel through and through Slimehouse to me.
Yeah, I feel like something that really made this ring as slime to me is it's pretty much the same movie as Hop, which is definitely a Slimehouse. It's even, they're both James Marsden accompanying CGI animals who are extreme and talk back and are just overall comedic characters. I do think Sonic himself is a very slimy character, and I think that in this he could have been a little more like the Sonic from the games. They don't really rely that much on sort of his like, he sort of has the attitude of a Shark Boy type, just a very extreme sort of like 90s version. And in this movie he was not completely toned up to that. I think Jim Carrey's performance is not incredibly slimy. For a Jim Carrey performance, I'd put it at about the caliber of Count Olaf, and that he has a few scenes where he really gets to let loose. There's one scene in particular where he like dances in his lair that's very Jim Carrey, very slimy. But overall, this felt sort of, despite the presence of Sonic, who himself was a slimy character, despite that, this movie overall just rung as kind of a kid's comedy and not completely a Slimehouse movie. So I think I gave it a 6 or a 7. I don't remember exactly, but not too high.
Yeah, I actually kind of agree with Max here. There's a couple good points that you guys have, that all three of you have brought up. Sonic being kind of characterized as like a kid who has that really extreme attitude. I really like the Shark Boy comparison. Did really kind of ring really, really heavily as Slimehouse to me. This kind of extreme kind of, I like to call it like ratitude, like awesome kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The character being so awesome and like does really awesome tricks and, is just such a rad kind of guy. I think to me that was very Slimehouse. That said, kind of, the humor was very contemporary and topical and felt kind of in that, slimy vein. But overall, there was kind of it to me kind of almost felt more kind of, as Max is saying, kind of just on a family blockbuster scale. And I think I gave this an 8 in my, official submissions. But the few days afterwards, I was like, man, I would definitely drop that down to a 7 or 6, kind of thinking about it a little more. But yeah, definitely the slime's there. It's one of those movies too where we see an IP kind of adapted into the modern world in a kind of a haphazard way. Another movie I think of is like Yogi Bear or The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle or Looney Tunes Back in Action, which is a great movie, by the way.
Yeah, it feels just like those.
It feels in a way where to me, I played Sonic as a kid, and it kind of loses that spirit. And so maybe it was me just kind of like thinking, when they make a Sonic movie, it should be like in the real true spirit of Sonic. This just kind of felt like, oh, they're plopping Sonic in the United States and all hell breaks loose. But there wasn't enough antics for me. There wasn't enough hijinks for me. It was just kind of these like, middle of the road action sequences that didn't feel particularly slimy, particularly exciting, particularly interesting, just kind of all around.
I guess Sonic has enough of his own shtick that kind of counter skews that for me. I also just want to point out it felt so corporate in the way that the jokes are often built around products. Like I counted like there's a Fitbit reference, there's a Zillow reference, there are 2 Olive Garden jokes in this movie.
The product placement in this movie is out of this world. Like the amount of Toyota, the Zillow insert shot made me laugh out loud.
Yeah, so that kind of feels more slimy to me, just compared to similar to some of the other stuff we've seen. And
I think the creators clearly wanted this to be a Slimehouse movie, and that they felt so badly that Sonic needed to have a eventually estranged parental figure enough that they created the character of this owl.
Oh yeah, because that's not that's not
so
a character
weird.
from the games. I did my research, so they created this owl-based lore, the Sonic, which I don't even know if I can say that feels slimy. I'm not even sure what realm that idea comes from.
And then when it turns out the planet he lands on is Earth, and then the layer he builds is very Grinch-esque, where he's kind of like a social pariah and has like all the fun stuff you'd want in a kid's room, So that bumped up the slime factor for me.
Yeah, for sure.
And that idea of kind of the outsider, the kind of like creature in the woods, so to speak, being actually a really nice, character, I think is a very, it's a very fairy tale-esque idea, but we see that a lot in Slimehouse. I wouldn't go as far as to call it a Slimehouse specific trope, but it's definitely appears in a lot of kind of children's storytelling.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's our halfway mark. I just want to say to all our listeners out there, thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to share the podcast with your friends. We wouldn't be able to do it without listeners' support and hearing back positive things from people. So thanks everyone. If you're still listening, keep on listening and keep telling other people to listen.
And take some requests. We'll do some requests.
Yeah, and echoing Nelson, I think it's been a really, really fun year, and we wouldn't be able to do it without our listeners, but we also want to, hear our listeners' thoughts on the Slimehouse itself. So if you got some favorites you want us to cover, follow us on social at SlimeHousePod, all platforms, and let us know what you want to watch, and we'll, we're putting together a schedule for season 2 soon, so get your requests in now.
Yeah, for sure. We'd love to hear from you all, and thank you to everybody who listens. Even if you just started listening now or you've been listening the whole time, thank you, and keep listening and share it with your friends.
And if you're feeling really generous, you can actually support us on Anchor and donate directly to it. It probably doesn't come as a surprise that this is not a lucrative endeavor for us, but we love to do it, and I think with anybody who wanted to support us, it would give us more opportunities to do more cool stuff and expand it bigger. So we'd love to take any support we can, but we're going to keep doing it because we love it. So there's no pressure, but if you're feeling very generous, we'll take you up on that.
All right, are we ready to jump back in?
Yeah, for sure.
Ready as
Coming
ever.
in, okay. Coming in at number 5, the score of 7.25 is The Christmas Chronicles 2.
Interesting.
Oh wow! I thought this would be higher. I thought this would be higher. I
did too, honestly.
Are you Mrs. Claus? What is that thing?
Use an F. You're in Santa's village, the real one.
Wow, this is incredible.
We have over 300,000 shops in the village.
Whoa.
Everyone designed by Mrs. Claus.
She designed this place. I think it should be called Mrs. Claus's Village. Me too.
Well, I never thought of that.
Of course you didn't.
I sabotaged this movie's slime ranking. I didn't find it very slimy.
Why so, Jared?
It reminded me of what we're talking about with Christmas with the Cranks, but in a very different way. It has a lot of like slime credentials behind the camera. You got Chris Columbus, you got you got Chris Columbus, and you got 1492 Productions behind it, right? But like, I don't know, I just felt like a kind of bland corporate Christmas movie, and like the movie didn't feel very slimy. It wasn't very like, the sense of humor of it was like, it didn't really register as slimy to me. It just felt like, I felt like the high fantasy elements of it, especially compared to the first film, which I watched right before it, it felt a little at odds with what I would consider a typical Slimehouse movie.
Actually, I'm going to go completely the opposite direction. I had no idea how slimy this movie would register for me. I think from the very get-go, it almost feels like a Disney Channel original to me, where they're like at the beach and they're these kids and they're angsty, and then they get taken away on some magical mystery tour of sorts to the North Pole. And then you introduce these elves, which are kind of like a gremlin meets minion kind of thing, where they get both moments to be cute and they get moments of pure anarchy. And the gremlins felt so Slimehouse to me, just that, like, or not, I just called them gremlins. The elves felt so Slimehouse to me in every moment they got. They literally jam out to Who Let the Dogs Out by the Baha Men in one scene. So
yeah.
Say no more for me.
Yeah, to me, I think that the elves are really the main reason that this registered as so slimy to me. I gave it an 8. It was one of my higher rated movies from this endeavor. The way these elves looked, the CGI they had, the fact that they were these little creatures running around, the fact that when the elf who's the main antagonist of the film is like, for most of the time he'd spent as a human actor, but then at one point goes back to being the CGI elf, and the elf is still wearing sort of like the punk clothes and the beanie and all this. That red is very slimy to me. And like Nelson mentioned, there's like an elf dance party set to the Baha Men. That has to be the slimiest scene I've seen in a movie this year at the very least. And I just think having Kurt Russell playing this sort of, when you have sort of a leading man of the past kind of hamming it up in a role like this, that reads as very slimy to me, especially the scene where he gets to wear sunglasses and like dance around an airport and play saxophone. That felt very slimy to me.
Best scene of the movie for sure. Darlene Love coming in.
I can see why someone would consider those slimy, but like, it doesn't really have the point of view of the kid. I think this movie compared to the original is more about like Santa Claus and the world of the North Pole.
So I'll agree with you, Jared, in that I think the first, in terms of narrative, is much more Slimehouse. This one, in terms of aesthetic, is that feeling I think that Dorothy and Max alluded to in the very beginning of the episode of Slimehouse. I think I took more notes on this one than any movie that we watched in this activity. It wasn't the slimiest, I think, movie of 2020, but there were so many moments to me that felt like, wow, that is like very slimy. I have a note about them ordering chocolate milk at a bar, a note about DIY robots, and there's a big snowball fight, and the villain breaks the fourth wall in his lair that looks like that DIY mentality. There's just so many like little touches that feel so slimy to me that I was able to kind of forgive that, perspective that the narrative is kind of led by, the clauses. One of the kids even defeats a villain with a Nerf gun, like, to me, that is just so Slimehouse in its essence,
Yeah, a lot of the choices this movie made felt like Slimehouse choices for me. There's a moment where Mrs. Claus makes food, and the food she makes is all junk food that's like disguised Brussels sprouts. So like you can eat candy and it's Brussels sprouts. That's like Slimehouse to a T for me. And then my last thing is that this is the only movie that name drops our beloved thing. At one point, the stepbrother says they get sent to the kids' camp, which feels like a Slimehouse location at the resort. And the younger brother says, "If you need me, I'll meet you at the slime making station."
Oh, wow, that's true. Yeah. Slime is name dropped in the very film. So.
And we once again get this trope of spending Christmas in the tropicals and
skipping Christmas.
it's Yuletide tropes, but like Yuletide family tropes, and less so like Yuletide slime tropes to me. And it includes some of the things you guys are talking about, like every family Christmas, like Christmas with the Cranks, had jokes about sugar and sweets too. So I don't know. I was meh on the movie, and that's why I'm maybe meh on its slime factor.
This movie, I don't think I noticed quite as many narrative tropes or even character tropes, even though they were there, but I put down so many slimy gags, so much slimy humor, and I feel like that's what took it over the top for me, especially because I feel like you don't see much Slimehouse humor in even kids' movies now, and so I feel like the fact that the humor in this felt so slimy is what really took it over the top for me, even if the story really wasn't.
Yeah, me too. I couldn't believe some of the choices they were making. I was like, oh, that's a Slimehouse moment, and so yeah, that for me felt like it solidified it.
The kid that plays the younger brother of the main character, Jack, his name is Jazier Bruno, and I think he's a new up-and-coming slime star, as he was also in The Witches as the main child.
Yeah, and these are like his first two film roles, so he's really making a name for himself already out there.
And a last kind of epilogue to this discussion of this movie, this is directed by Chris Columbus, who has written or directed a few movies we've talked about: Home Alone, Christmas with the Cranks, a few others. And I loved how the airport flashback sequence in this movie had so many kind of very slight Home Alone references. For example, the woman yelling at the ticket counter that she needs to get back home for Christmas is an obvious allusion to Catherine O'Hara doing the same thing in the first Home Alone. The airport scene takes place in 1990, which is the same year Home Alone came out. Santa dancing in the sunglasses and saxophone, just like Macaulay Culkin does at his house in Home Alone as well. There's so many just like little tiny like breadcrumbs that allude to Home Alone in that sequence that I really kind of loved and found it really charming as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, this airport scene does not reveal that Elvis Presley is alive, I'm afraid. So Home Alone takes the edge on that one.
Shoot. All right, we're getting into the home stretch here.
Here we go. Coming in at number 4 with a score of 7.5 is The Sleepover.
Ooh. Sleepover. Oh. I thought this would have been a little higher. I mean, 4 is pretty high, but I actually thought this was going to be a little higher.
Guys, ninjas just stole your parents.
Hello again, Matilda. Time to get the old band back together.
Honey, you know these two?
How would somebody take your parents? Look, this is Mom's necklace. She never takes this off, ever. She's trying to tell us something? Look, the symbols match. This could help us find them.
This might be one of the most fun times I had this year watching all these Slimehouse movies. Maybe not the best, but it just feels like it has a lot of that slime component to it for me. So I rank this one pretty high. Just the kids getting in over their head and having to be like super spies essentially, or super thieves, and the younger brother, older sister dynamic, and just the overall premise of it felt just very, very Slimehouse.
It definitely felt like, I mean, I didn't know anything about this movie going into it, and I thought it was just going to be a movie about sleepover, and then yeah, and like and once like they established that like the older sister is trying to get into this party where her crush is throwing, I was like, okay, so it's gonna be like that's gonna be the main objective of the movie. They just go to that party, and then like I know there's gonna be this whole angle about the parents being secret agents, which is very Spy Kids. It also reminded me a little bit of the way it unfolded of the movie Date Night with Steve Carell and Tina Fey.
Very similar, yeah.
Yeah, and so I would say that this movie was like a mix of 3 movies. It had like the movie of the younger kid, like the younger brother and his friend, which is pure slime. Then you had the sister and her friend, and that's like more of a high school movie, like a Mean Girls to me. And then you had the secret agent stuff, which is sort of in the middle of those two in its slime level.
Yeah, I would say this movie had one of the slimiest characters we've had yet, with the younger brother character played by the actor, I believe, named Maxwell Simkins. He put in a very good performance in this movie. It's just this sort of obnoxious younger brother, and I think all the stuff with him, and like Jared was saying, his friend who has like strict parents and all this, is very slimy to me, and I think that aspect of the movie is very slimy. And I also think this has one of the slimier adult performances we've seen with Ken Marino.
Yes.
Who might be an upcoming slime MVP, because he's in another movie I'm predicting will make an appearance on this list. But he gives a very slimy performance as this just sort of like geeky guy who's in over his head and trying to fit in and seem tough, and just that all reads as a very Slimehouse parent figure to me, and just how bumbling and like trying to be tough he is, but failing at that, and just the humor in seeing like a parental figure fail feels extremely Slimehouse.
And Ken Marino, I don't know what this says about me, but I have a secret affinity for funny barf scenes in movies, and Ken Marino has a very excellent vomit scene in this movie.
He really does. That's one of the.
It's not a standard barf scene. It feels very real. It feels very authentic to how one would act if they were vomiting in the situation that he's in. And I legitimately laughed out loud in that sequence, very loud.
I did too.
This movie, I actually thought it was going to be a little more heavy on the kind of spy, secret agent, kind of master thief side of things, kind of thinking it would be a little more reminiscent of Spy Kids or The Tuxedo or Agent Cody Banks, something like that. But that being said, I still think it's a very pure Slimehouse movie. It's not a bad movie by any means. It's quick, it's fun, it's zippy, and it checks a lot of the kind of boxes that we've defined as real Slimehouse tenets.
I found myself just having so much fun with all the different characters who all felt like they belonged in Slimehouse. I think Ken Marino as the goofy dad who's like a baker who realizes his wife is a secret agent. He gets to do the most fun stuff. But then, even the teen girls for me felt like Slimehouse teens. They kind of felt like they would fit in like Hocus Pocus or something. They go to a party and they don't party, which is fun as well. That was one of the more effective Slimehouse movies of the year.
Yeah, definitely something, and this goes to the Christmas Chronicles as well, which we just spoke about. These definitely feel like something that would have been released in the heyday of like 2002, 2001, something like that, and I wouldn't even bat an eye at them feeling, ahead of their time. They just feel so rooted in that classic Slimehouse attitude and aesthetic.
There's a moment that's very kind of neo-slime where the one kid says, "I'm allergic to peanuts," and all the other kids at the same time go, "Same." And that is really funny because a certain generation of kids, my younger siblings being part of this, are allergic to peanuts. There's something that happened that made a ton of people allergic to peanuts. And so it's a real thing. And it's funny that the movie made a really nice, subtle joke about that kind of generational fact. And we have another neo-slime trope is the viral video. We see that in a lot of these. And this one is probably the funniest viral video where it's really the inciting incident of the plot, but the dancing kid goes viral and sets off a course of events.
And I don't remember, did this say hits or did it say views?
This one I actually believe said hits, not views, which I think is something funny that we've seen a lot in these kind of more modern Slimehouse movies. It's one of those things that really hints at these are movies written by adults, because I feel like the term hits is a very classic internet term when referring, and especially when referring to a YouTube video. I think anyone under 35 will know that you say, "Oh, this movie has 1 million views." But all these movies say, "Oh yeah, look, you got 1 million hits on YouTube," which nobody says if you're under 35. But the only movie that correctly says views instead of hits is 4 Kids and It, which we've already talked about. So hats off, kudos to the Brits over across the pond for correctly identifying technological contemporary terms.
My offerings.
Max and I couldn't stop saying that after watching it. I'd be like, "My offerings."
I realized I forgot to get that one in earlier.
All right, Dorothy, what's our number 3? This is getting intense.
Okay, here we go. Coming in at number 3 with a score of 7.5, we've got Magic Camp.
Abracadabra.
Welcome to Magic Camp! Unlock your potential with world-famous magicians.
Andy Duckerman is back, baby!
Hey, where are you going? I'm right here.
Nelson, this one I felt might have been a little controversial because I know how much you love Adam Devine.
Well, to be fair, so backstory, I can't stand Adam Devine, especially his frat boy humor. Just like it just gets me on the inside somehow. And yet, I have to give the guy credit. He's doing kind of like a wannabe Jack Black thing where he's a magic teacher who doesn't want to be there, doesn't want to teach the kids, but then comes around and kind of learns from his students, and they of course learn from him, and they all get to be great magicians. And I have to say, I thought his performance was pretty solid, and the movie has a very summer camp or Troop Beverly Hills feeling to it, where it's kind of kids and grown-ups in a camper setting, and hijinks ensue. And so yeah, it just kind of felt like old school 90s Slimehouse to me.
It felt like old school Disney slime too. Like it had something about it being a Disney Plus movie maybe, but like it felt very like the polish of it was very slimy to me. And then there's jokes about animals and animal excrement in particular that rang true to the slime ethos. And then we'll definitely have to do a summer camp slime series because I think that's a very important sub-branch of Slimehouse movies, and Heavyweights is one good example of that. But yeah, I mean, this movie is definitely that to a T.
Yeah, I feel like solely just from like the setting of this is what set it so high up on my slime radar. Sort of just like summer camp comedy feels like something that's aimed towards kids. Feels like something that you don't see in family movies anymore that was very popular back in sort of the prime slime era. So just having it be a summer camp comedy. And then I also just think that there were a lot of performances in this that read as pretty slimy. Like we said, Adam Devine's doing a very Jack Black style performance, and just that made this feel very slimy to me. And yeah, this just felt like very much a throwback to an era of family films we don't see anymore. And to me, that's kind of what made it feel like such peak slime for the year.
A lot of the character tropes are very Slimehouse. It's our second movie in a row where there's a kid who's kind of afraid of everything, and naturally their character journey is to not be afraid of everything. And then the bullies are very slimy as well. There's a great line where they said, if we're at magic camp, even the bullies are nerds.
Yeah, I think the bullies definitely were one of the main things that stood out to me when I watched this, and just how, first of all, how cartoonishly bullies they are. Sort of how, like, right when the new kids show up, the first thing they do is start bullying. And then just the fact that there were bullies who used magic to bully. It's just, like, the slimiest idea to me. That, like, a bully would take your pencil and do just, like, a flashy sleight of hand and make it disappear. Just extremely slimy character to me, or those bullies.
Yeah, that's very funny. This was actually one of the movies I liked least watching, although I do, admit that it is a very slimy feature for sure. It's interesting because I think, if this was made back in the peak slime era, I feel like we would have seen so much more of that kind of like scatological humor included in this. And, it's present in this, but it definitely feels much lighter than kind of we're used to from kind of the prime slime era. But that said, I think, as kind of everyone's identified, this just kind of the whole setup, the setting, the style of humor that is present, it's a very, classic Slimehouse movie. I think I had this at an 8.
Even stuff like it has a single parent setup, which is, again, that's like one of the most common things I saw in 2020 Slime. I feel like pretty much every movie had a single parent, and usually like an overworked, loving, but like isn't doing it quite right.
4 of the movies we've talked about so far on the show, so that's half of the movies we've talked about, have featured a single parent or broken family in some respects. Magic Camp, The Christmas Chronicles, Timmy Failure, 4 Kids in It, and The Witches. Sorry, that's 5 out of 8. That's more than half.
Yeah,
and we've got more to go. It just, something about that is just very much a very recurring theme. It's like that and floss dancing, and
you could count Sonic as well with the single mom owl.
I want to identify a new trope that we saw in Magic Camp. So at one point, Adam Devine is an Uber driver, which also a lot of Uber drivers in these movies. Everyone's an Uber driver. He's an Uber driver, and suddenly Jeffrey Tambor, who's like the magic guru, appears in the back seat, and he like sees it in the rearview mirror and goes like, whoa, like where'd you come from, kind of thing. And he's a magician, so that's funny. Second Slimehouse movie I've seen that in, Evan Almighty, also has the same thing happen.
I'm going to claim a new slime trope here. It's when Adam Devine who plays this coach, this teacher figure, leaves to go do something else when the kids need him. So I think we see that in the Mighty Ducks movies, and I think School Rock has that kind of like nurturing figure who leaves the scene, and then these kids are kind of on their own, but then they learn, they're the show anyway.
I actually have another slime trope that I feel like has fit other movies, maybe not ones that you all have covered yet, but it's kind of outside of the realm of like content. Instead, it's movies that were filmed a long time ago, but their release was stunted because nobody wanted to see them.
That actually feels very Neo Slime.
Yeah.
This was filmed in January 2017.
Yeah, that the one thing that tipped me off to that was I was like, oh, Jeffrey Tambor being in this, like, this seems very like bold of Disney to cast him after his kind of Me Too controversies. But then I quickly learned that they had kind of dumped it on Disney Plus after.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why I said earlier the pandemic has been kind to Slimehouse maybe, because studios just want to put stuff out. A lot of this stuff was, I don't want to say too bad, but like not up to the par of their usual studio releases, so they're just kind of trying to dump it where they can and give kids stuff to watch at home too, since so many kids are stuck at home.
Yeah, because the Slimehouse movies don't have to appeal to grown-ups if they go straight to streaming, so it's kind of a win-win.
Yeah.
Time for number 2. Are you all ready?
No, I'm going to Magic Camp right now.
I'll be back next time. Okay, coming in at second place with a score of 8.75 is The War with Grandpa.
Oh, wow.
How's your daughter's place at? She gave me my grandson's room. He's not too happy about it.
How do you like your room?
Kid looking. I didn't want it to be this way either.
I just want my room back. Get away from me! Oh, come on.
I didn't give this that high of a score, actually, so I'm curious to hear yours.
Wow, that's my La La Land moment for sure.
Yeah.
Jump on in. Why didn't you give us this high of a score?
I feel like maybe my sight, I had really high hopes of how slimy this would be, just based on, actually I have a personal history with the book it's based on. It was the first book I ever was assigned to read for school. And so I just remember reading The War with Grandpa, and it's just something that's very stuck in my head as being like, why was this part of the curriculum? Just this weird like children's book that's like semi-popular. And I would say I don't remember that many details about the book, but it's slimier than the movie ended up being. So I think I was expecting a lot more sort of like, the book is way more focused on traps, him making lots of traps for his grandfather, which you don't see that much in here. You just see more general competition between the two of them, and it just felt more just like a comedy than Slimehouse to me. But I think I still ended up giving it I want to say a 6, because I just think that seeing old people doing hijinks is very slimy, and seeing Robert De Niro in this role in particular, I feel like Red is sort of slimy to me. Just the character of having, like we've talked before about having these prestige actors kind of playing it down for kids, and this feels like a peak example of that. And this also sort of has a lot of Slimehouse royalty behind the camera, in that it was directed by Tim Hill, who made, amongst others, Max Keeble's Big Move, which is kind of always brought up.
And Hop.
And Hop as well, which we already mentioned. And it was shot by Greg Gardner, who shot Son of the Mask, I think Elf, one of our last movies, Beverly Hills Chihuahua 3, Marmaduke. So a lot of slime behind the camera. And I don't know, something about it just felt more like Meet the Parents, but child-focused.
I mean, we talked about slime auteurs and how Robert Rodriguez is someone we would consider that, but every movie Tim Hill has made that I know of, like he's also done the first Alvin and the Chipmunks movie, like those are all Slimehouse movies to me. Anyway, this was a 10 to me. Like this really got the outrageous, like I get what Max is saying, that like maybe the actual like pranks and traps weren't like as pronounced as maybe they are in the book, but like the outrageous hijinks were there. This movie nailed that to me. Like just like stuff like when the kid goes to school and then like the bully for one thing, but also the bully opens the backpack and gets slimed, like
oh yeah.
Yeah,
like, and this like the way that we've talked about the thing about wise guy actors getting a different kind of vehicle for them in this kind of like campier kids movie, and De Niro and Uma Thurman, I guess, also kind of qualifies as that. And the stuff with her and the cop, she keeps on getting in the trouble with the cop. She like throws coffee and then a snake at him. Like I said, just the hijinks are there. Humor is crude too. Like it's what I think of when I think of Slime.
Yeah, I'd say this. I need to, after having seen, this was one of the earlier movies I watched in the Slime marathon that was coming off the end of watching so many classic Slime movies. I feel like I might have suffered in comparison to those. So this actually is one I would like to rewatch in hindsight now. But something about it, the whole look and just the humor felt juvenile but not quite slimy. Like his pants were falling down a few times. That was very slimy. There was a scene where old people played dodgeball. That felt very slimy as well. But just overall, it didn't read as slimy as I was hoping it to.
I've had this one at a 10 as well. Actually, this is my personal number one Slimehouse movie of the year for a lot of the same reasons Jared has. It has not only the outrageous hijinks of just things like chili getting dumped on people, and then like at one point the grandpa hijacks this kid's essay and makes him, instead of saying like his essay as it's supposed to be written, says stuff like, you know, butt jokes and fart jokes, and the teacher makes him keep reading it even though it's just butt and fart jokes. And so stuff like that, just it just feels like it has all the makings of like classic Slimehouse stuff. And another big part of it, I think, is not just the main boy who gives us Slimehouse performance, but then he has an older sister who's kind of like the quintessential Slimehouse teenage girl, and then a younger sister who's obsessed with Christmas. And so this gives it the Yuletide aesthetics at times, and I love that character. She's my favorite character. I think it's I've never seen this in any other movie where like a recurring gag is a Christmas obsessed character, where she has like a Christmas themed birthday party in August or September where a lot of outrageous hijinks ensue. So yeah, 10 for me.
I'll say I had this one very high as well. To me, it rang as the most classic depiction of Slimehouse to me. I think a lot of that, you know, is attributed to Tim Hill directing, is a real key example of, you know, a Slimehouse auteur, if you will, if there are any. To me, I do think it was a lot more tame than some of those movies, like say a Max Keeble. It doesn't just go balls to the wall kind of with that children's perspective and kind of gross out humor, because you do have a lot of the side of the story that is Robert De Niro and his, you know, older elderly AARP buddies, you know, walking around town, Christopher Walken and Cheech Marin being those friends. But I will say, out of all the movies that we watched, this was the one I laughed out loud the most in. There was some genuine laugh out loud moments that maybe it's just because I think this was the second to last movie I saw out of the 20 or so we watched. So maybe it was just, you know, the delirium of too many slime movies and, you know, some really key, you know, ketchup and mustard to the crotch region jokes. But I don't know. It's definitely a Slimehouse movie through and through. I think I gave this a 9 just because it did feel a little bit more tame, a little more believable than some, you know, true, you know, Slimehouse to the max. But again, prime example, you can't go wrong with this movie if you're in the mood for some sugary Slimehouse.
I would give this movie, in retrospect, perhaps a higher slime score after having listening to this. So just thinking back on a lot of the stuff in it, it's maybe slimier than it came off. I do think the tameness, even if it's only tame, comparable to other Slimehouse, is what kind of stopped this. And I would never call this movie grounded, but it's definitely more grounded than kind of what my vision of a complete, all-out Slimehouse movie is.
Agreed. Sorry if I misspoke about this movie being grounded. It is by no means grounded.
The main character gets grounded.
He gets grounded. Yeah, there is. Well, with such high slime scores for this, I have to say we have to look forward to the World War with Grandpa is already in the works.
What?
Yeah, I don't know if if they got De Niro back on board or what, but I did see there is the World War with Grandpa, which I don't know what that means. Maybe all the grandpas in the world are having a war declared, but looking forward to that one.
All right, the moment we've all been waiting for. This has been a long haul, you guys. A month or two watching all these movies. So
yeah. All comes down to this.
Drum roll.
Here we go. Coming in at number 1 with a score of 9 is the main event.
Oh yeah. The main event.
Truly the main
slimiest-
Slimehouse event of 2020.
Fitting.
This mask makes me super fast, crazy strong.
Woo! Somebody! I'm gonna break your face, nerd.
I think you should leave them alone.
That was the coolest thing ever.
The WWE is hosting a winner-take-all tournament. The winner will become the next WWE superstar.
Yeah, baby!
To start that off, I think I have a particular reason why this might be as high on our list. This was actually one of the writers on this film is Seth Carr, the 13-year-old star that plays the main kid in the movie, is a writer on this movie. So literally seeing a child's fantasy. I mean, there's a lot of other writers on the movie too, 2 of whom are wrestlers actually. So wrestler, this is a fully wrestler. And also the writers actually are, it's Seth Carr, the kid, Adam Pawley, who played the dad, the wrestler Keith Lee, who played Smooth Operator in the movie, and Renee Young, who's the ring announcer that appears in this movie. So everyone that wrote this movie is an on-screen talent in the movie as well.
I think it's worth noting too, on that note, Max, that this is a WWE Films production.
Yeah, this is put out by WWE's movie studio, and it's maybe the most wrestling centric of anything they've put out. Because a lot of the time they'll just put out these action movies starring a wrestler or just comedies with a wrestler. There's one I'd like to cover for this podcast at one point, The Chaperone, starring Triple H. But this is one of the first ones that's really focused around wrestling as an entertainment. And the way this movie presents it is strangely 100% genuine, but also like to where children can fight in it and everyone has to have a character too. It's very fascinating.
And where the people have powers like a farting character.
Yeah, definitely the
smelly
slimiest
character.
part is the fart, the big fart at one point in this movie.
That's the slime moment of the year for sure.
Yeah,
that is absolutely.
Yeah, so this was my actually number 3 for me, but I give it an 8. I think humor-wise, yes, it's the crudest humor of all these movies, and it's a very worthy top spot. Why it was held back from being number 1 for me personally is because I think I was grading movies more on the thematic elements of slime rather than the aesthetic elements of slime. And comparing this to my top 2, which were War with Grandpa and Timmy Failure, it doesn't feel like the main character of this movie is really rebelling against anything. And I think the more Slimehouse I watch, the more I feel like that's sort of like the central tenet of Slimehouse movies in terms of like if there is an ideology to them. From that element, like theme-wise, I think maybe it could have been a little more slimy, but this look of the movie is slimy. Wrestling in general has that kind of like potential for slimy kind of hijinks, and then I think the other slimiest gag in this is like the running one about the way the mask smells.
I was gonna say I definitely feel like the 2010s of wrestling are sort of Slimehouse as an art form in general, just in the style of humor that you kind of see. And this movie just kind of is that style of wrestling, that era of wrestling translated into movie form, where it's just a lot of like juvenile scatological humor, a lot of just like very like empty machismo, but not even in like a Hulk Hogan style way, like a kid on the playground style way. And I feel like this movie's just a whole sense of humor and sort of pure childishness really made it slimy to me.
I think the thematics are very Slimehouse. Once again, we've got a single overworked parent and a goofy grandma trying to take care of this kid. So he's kind of getting left behind, and then he stumbles across this mask that's smelly, yes, but that gives him superpowers essentially. And so it's this wish fulfillment of like, what if I found a mask that would allow me to compete in a wrestling tournament, which conveniently is in the same city that he's in. And he's, biking to and from everywhere and dodging bullies left and right. And he's got to deal with his friendships, and his friends are kind of nerdy, but in a cool way, I guess. And then there's like a 12-year-old girl his age who he has a fat crush on, and overcome with that. So I feel like beat for beat for beat, I felt like this was like Slimehouse moments happening, just like some of our sort of highest ranking Slimehouse movies, totally from the kids' point of view, and totally kid-centric ideas and problems, combined with lots of fart humor, lots of stinky humor, lots of bully humor, you know, all the elements that really make you laugh and make you enjoy yourself on a Slimehouse roller coaster.
Echoing kind of everything everyone said, this just, to me, in terms of just attitude and pacing and pure kind of energy, felt the most Slimehouse to me this year. I want to compare it for a second to The War with Grandpa, which was our number 2 of the year. And both of these, I think, have a very similar mentality, very similar sense of humor. But this one had just a pure kind of electricity to it. It was fast paced, really high energy. It was just a mile a minute. Whereas to me, The War with Grandpa almost felt a little tame and sleepy at times. This one is just the kids running the show, and it's a kid's world from beginning to end, hanging up the bullies by their underwear on the lockers. There's a scene where there's burglars and they throw ice cream at them and spin them around really, really fast on the counter, which just seems like something straight out of a Looney Tunes episode, you know? There's a scene where this like really mean wrestler just eats a stick of butter as kind of like his energy. And, you know, it's just stuff like that these little scenes that are so slight, but there's so many back to back to back that just make this just like a full throttle to me, Slime. I gave this a 10. I also really enjoyed this movie for what it's worth. It's not a good movie by any means, but I had a smile on my face the whole time just because I think it knows what it is and it doesn't take itself too seriously. And I think that's a lot of the WWE personality coming through. You know, WWE being such a lively theatrical sport in and of its own. I think that this movie, you know, just abides by that philosophy, and it's hard-hitting entertainment.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just the fact that I've been a long-time WWE fan, but I really did. I agree with Jasper. I really enjoyed this movie. I think it should be, if anything we watch becomes a slime cult film for the rest of Slimehouse time to come, I think it should be this one. I think this is just a very fun, super over-the-top slimy movie. And I'm glad we still have movies like this coming out so long past the prime slime era.
On Netflix, too, so you can get it tonight.
Make it the main event of your night.
On that note, I think, you know, if you're interested in watching any of these movies we've talked about, a lot of them are available for streaming, you know, at home. Netflix, Disney+, Hulu, Amazon Prime. Please do check these out. We don't do this just for ourselves. Think of us as your Slimehouse professors. We want you to learn about the genre as well. Please seek these out if you feel so inclined.
Dorothy, would you be able to share with us some of the ones that just barely didn't make the cut for the top 10?
I'd say the closest to making it was My Spy.
Interesting.
Oh, wow. That's actually interesting to me because I didn't think that one was too slimy.
I had that very low, actually. I think I had it at a 3.
I had a higher score for it, but I think it isn't very slimy. For one thing, I was like, wow, this movie has a lot of like foul language and action, and then it turned out it's a PG-13 movie.
Yeah, so it's such a weird example of a movie that just like is for no one.
Yeah. So like comparing Sleepover to My Spy, I think that's a good case study in like how it's very similar like premise of a movie about like spies and kids movies, kind of like that kind of collision of different subgenres can like. One movie can do that in a slimier way, and another, like, you know, doesn't really establish itself as a kid's movie up front and has more intense action sequences. And I think that's a really, like, good sort of, like, example of that sort of, like, juxtaposition.
On that note, too, just to kind of further that conversation about slime versus maybe not so slimy, on the Christmas side of things, you know, The Christmas Chronicles 2, we had very highly rated as a slime movie. Another one that a few of us watched was Jingle Jangle, A Christmas Journey, which is also on Netflix. I didn't think Jingle Jangle was too slimy, you know, even though it is centered around childlike, innocent views of Christmas time and toy building and creative innovation. It's a musical. It, you know, there isn't that, you know, snarkiness. It's very well made. It's very, you know, refined in how it presents itself. Christmas Chronicles 2 is, you know, it's very crude. It's very off the wall. It's very silly. Dorothy, which movies this year, I'm curious, were kind of in your top 10?
I figured 4 Kids and It might be higher just by the fact of like the creature was such a Slimehouse trope to me, and the way that he granted the wishes was farting. But that shows how slimy this year was.
All right, now that we've heard the top 10, are there any movies that didn't make the cut that you're actually quite surprised might have not slipped into the top 10 in terms of their sliminess?
I thought Artemis Fowl had an outside chance because like it's such a weird movie that like when we gave the Grinch slime scores, I think we gave it higher scores because it's such a weird movie, and I thought that kind of like essence might inflate Artemis Fowl's score, but didn't pan out.
On the outset, I thought that was going to be a Slimehouse movie, but aside from Josh Gad, I did not find anything really Slimehouse about it, except for maybe the kid-centricness of it, but even that was kind of a stretch. That movie is not very good, to put it politely, but I had it at a 4, and even that was like really resting its shoulders on Gad.
Yeah, I felt like the Babysitter's Guide to Monster Hunting might have made the cut. I didn't rank it super slimy or anything, but I felt like it did have a chance.
Yeah,
I thought that about that one, kind of same stuff I said about Christmas Chronicles. Like, it's that, but for spooky slime. Like, I just feel like it's just kind of a
I had that in my predicted top 10 as in the bottom, but yeah, I had it at a 6, I think, just kind of out of its sheer kind of aesthetics. Like they had those like 2 like goblin creatures that were really slimy. It kind of felt in some ways like a Robert Rodriguez movie at certain times, and just the kind of the like wish fulfillment. Wouldn't it be cool if I was like part of a secret monster hunting society kind of thing? That said, right before this episode, I was like, I can't remember a thing about that movie, and I just saw it a month ago. But yeah, I do really like the director, Rachel Talalay. Go watch Tank Girl if you haven't. That's a great movie.
It reminded me of Labyrinth a little bit with its like, the plot's about a kidnapped kid that the main character's supposed to be looking after. And just like, it felt a little moodier for a Slimehouse movie. Kind of like more, it just didn't match the vibe I looked for.
I thought it was actually pretty scary for a kid's movie too. Like, Tom Felton was horrifying in it, and I was like, geez. But that's, not really a reflection on its sliminess. I just sort of an anecdote. I had it at a 7. It was like, on my ranking, it was actually my number 11 for what that's worth. But just in summary, I think 2020 was very fruitful for Slimehouse, the podcast, and Slimehouse, the movie genre. And, one of the things that's exciting is that 2021's Slimehouse slate is going to be very slimy as well. So, buckle your seatbelts. We're not going anywhere.
Yeah, in fact, next year is starting right off the bat, New Year's Day, with a huge slime contender, which I'm sure we'll review soon after it's released.
Kick off season 2 with We Can Be Heroes. Just for one day.
But thank you so much, Dorothy, for being our MC and a frequent guest. We hope to have you more in season 2.
Of course, it's an honor. I'm excited to see where season 2 is going, and I'm happy to be a part of it whenever I can.
Cat in the Hat,
I'm ready.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dorothy, and thanks for doing all the back end of this voting.
I'm glad to. Thank you.
All right. And with that, that wraps season 1 of Slimehouse. Everyone have a safe and healthy holiday. Be smart and be good to each other. And from all of us at Slimehouse, stay slimy. Have a good one, everybody.
Slimehouse, a podcast created by Jared Anderson, Jasper Birnbaum, Max Morris, and H. Nelson Tracy. If you like this episode, you can find more fun on slimehousepod.com. Our website is created by Brian Hume of Valencia Creative Company. Our theme music composed by Greta Russell. Support this podcast at anchor.fm/slimehousepod or by following us on social media at slimehousepod on all platforms.